Hey everybody, how's it going? We are back. We're back. More book readings for this War of the Spark Forsaken. Here we go. Chapter 20. Kaya. The representatives from the Orzhov Syndicate, Guildmaster Kaya, flanked by Chief Enforcer Bilagru and Advocate Tomik Vrona, were among the last to arrive for the conference at the Senate House, where most of the participants had already assembled before the statue/corpse of the Sphinx Isperia, the former Azorius Guildmaster. Taking the late Isperia's place was Lavinia, accompanied by a Senator Nilosh, who took some pleasure, though Lavinia clearly took none, in introducing his new acting guildmaster as the Azorius Senate's Grand Arbiter Protem. Lavinia grumbled, "I prefer being an arrester." Nilosh tissed at her. "That would now be thoroughly inappropriate, Grand Arbiter Protem." The title repeated as an afterthought, and almost certainly as a dig. Standing as far from the two Azorius delegates as possible was Isperia's killer, or perhaps executioner, Queen Vraska herself, with her erstwhile aide Storev representing the Golgari swarm. The Gorgon Queen wore a grim expression, but at least her eyes weren't glowing and ready to turn anyone else to stone. For the time being. Aya was glad to see Guildmaster Ral Zarek there with Chamberlain Marie to represent the Izet League. But he too looked inward, his visage dark, and even the presence of Tomik failed to raise a smile. The Blood Witch Ixava was there for the cult of Rakdos, the Biomancer Vorel for the Simic Combine, Gan Shokta, the Gruul clans, Guildmaster Aurelia, the Boros Legion, and Spearmaster Boruvo, the Celestia Conclave. There were a handful of planeswalkers there, all gathered around living Guildpact Niv Mizzet, Jaya Ballard, Vivian Reed, and the Wanderer. Kaya was surprised to see them. She had assumed that Jaya in particular would have gone to Theros for Gideon Jura's memorial service. "I thought the two of them were close." Kaya stood a short distance away, trying and failing to analyze their motives for attending. Jaya looked troubled, Vivian looked tense, and the Wanderer, Kaya had no idea. Between the Wanderer's long white hair and her low and wide-brimmed hat, Kaya couldn't even manage a decent look at her face. The last to arrive was an apologetic Aurelia, the real Aurelia, who caught sight of the previous Aurelia and glared at her until she shrugged and morphed into the decidedly unapologetic Lazov of House Demir. "Why do you play these games?" Kaya asked him. "I'm a scamp," he replied dryly. "Where's your entourage hiding?" "I sent Teo to find Araethia," Kaya responded, then instantly regretted giving up even that much information to the spy master. "Why does the Orzhov seek my daughter?" Gan Shokta demanded. "The Orzhov doesn't. I seek her, because I'm worried about her." The big man waved off such concerns, not dismissively, but with pride. "Araethia Shokta requires no guildmaster's concern." An impatient Niv Mizzet interrupted. "Let's get down to business. Queen Vraska, Guildmaster Kaya, Guildmaster Zarek, do you accept your assignments?" None of the three rushed to answer, and instead, Chamberlain Marais stepped forward. "Before they respond, Firemind, I must question the wisdom of sending 3 new guildmasters away from Ravnica at such a crucial time." "Must you now?" growled the Firemind, less than pleased than this goblin he had raised to her current position would dare to question his wisdom. Ral stepped in. I believe it is necessary. Ravnica needs to know it can trust its leaders to defeat would-be conquerors and bring its enemies to justice. Those of us, like Vraska, Kai, and myself, who collaborated even briefly with the Dragon Bolus, have much to prove. That's why I volunteered to hunt Tezzeret. He opened the planar bridge that allowed the Eternals to kill so many sentients on Ravnica. Beyond that, I truly believe Tezzeret might become a major threat to our world, if not the entire multiverse. Besides, we have a history. We've fought before. For me, this is personal. Not for me, Vraska said. He'd been staring at Isperia with some satisfaction before turning to those assembled. I'm no apologist for Dovin Van, but I don't care much about him one way or another. Nor do I have any desire to leave Ravnica or the Golgari. Still, I'm aware of what you all think of me and my actions. To be clear, I killed Isperia for personal reasons, not for Bolus. But I'm also aware that, personal motives aside, I did exactly what the dragon wanted and needed from me. The Firemind stated, and the result was the destruction of our alliance, which resulted in my temporary death and nearly resulted in Bolus's victory. That's debatable, Kaya said. Vraska nodded her thanks. Boral stated, what's not debatable is that if you don't cooperate, the Golgari will be crushed by the combined might of the other 9 guilds. That's extremely debatable, Kaya stated back. Raul waded in as well. And extremely unlikely. The living guild pack would prevent any such conflict. Niv puffed 2 rings of smoke from his snout and seemed to consider this. Yes, he finally said. I would have to prevent that. But much damage might be done to the Golgari before I found the right moment to step in. Perhaps, if Queen Vraska succeeds in killing Ban, all past crimes and offenses will be forgiven, and the other guilds will leave the Golgari in peace. You have my word. And I put so much faith in that, Vraska replied cynically. But fine. I will spend, say, a week or so planeswalking away from my guild and my home world to hunt down Dovin Ba'an. You shouldn't have to if you don't want to, Kaya said. Vraska seemed to appreciate the sentiment, but she shook her head. It hardly matters. Like you, I'm an assassin as well as a guild master. Killing Ba'an is just another job for me. He picked the losing side, and the winning side wants him dead. If Ba'an must die to further Golgari interests, so be it. The Firemind turned to Kaya. What say you? Before she answers, Kaya said, are we truly agreed that Liliana must die? There was a kind of collective groan that emerged from the group, as if to say, not this again. Not this again, Boral grumbled out loud, rolling his eyes. She killed Bolus. None of us did. Kaya turned to look Niv Mizzet in the eye. And that includes you, Firemind. All that proves, Aurelia said, is that she could have killed Bolus from the beginning. Instead, she waited. Waited until thousands were dead, and most of them at the hands of Eternals she controlled. Apparently, she needed Gideon's help. Then she should have asked for it, and maybe if she had, Gideon Jura would be alive today. Beyond that, Lazav mused, can we suffer the continued existence of someone with uncertain motives and enough power to destroy Nicole Bolas. What might she do next? Jaya took this in and nodded. So no dissenters. No one spoke, not even Kaya. Jaya nodded again and said, no more. Niv-Mizzet turned back to Kaya. Mistress, we believe you are the best qualified to assassinate Vess. Really? Kaya sounded dubious. Because I'm usually hired to kill ghosts, spirits, and the undead. Liliana is none of those. It's likely you'll have to kill quite a few of the undead to get to the necromancer Vess. In addition, you have no relationship with Liliana, no baggage, no conflict. Like Vraska, this would just be another job to you. That's all well and good, but we still haven't addressed the pragmatics. How am I to find Liliana? How are any of us supposed to find any of our targets? As we discussed yesterday, all traces of their journeys will be long gone by now. Not all traces, said the Wanderer from beneath her hat. Niv agreed. This is true. Use logic. Deduce where each would go. Vivian opined. A necromancer like Vess might feel most at home on Innistrad. Or perhaps she's on Dominaria, the Wanderer stated with certainty. Jaya responded with equal certainty. That's the last place she'd go, believe me. Nevertheless, that is where she went. I followed her there from here when she planeswalked away. You followed her? Ral asked. Why? The why hardly matters, Ganshokta stated. I'm just glad she did. The Wanderer nevertheless responded. For all reasons stated above, I believe she might still be a danger and wanted to know where she'd go to ground. The answer is Dominaria. Where on Dominaria? Jaya demanded. Not a place I recognized. It was a swamp or morass, with an old house visible in the distance. She actually stumbled in the water and nearly drowned. I didn't go to aid her, but she managed to surface. If I didn't know what she was capable of, I'd say it was almost pathetic. Jaya stared at the ground. Then she's as desperate as Jace believed. He looked up. Liliana has returned to her childhood home. Kaya eyed Jaya. Since you bring up Jace, I have to ask why you're even here. You hardly seem enthusiastic about this project, and I thought we were leaving the Gatewatch out of it. Jaya corrected her. Your Gatewatch, not me. You took an oath. I never have. But if you must know, I'm worried about the protégé Chandra Nala'a. Last night I followed her to Baan's home on Kaladesh. Was he there? Vraska asked. No, he's been there, but had since left. But my concern is Chandra and the current conflict tearing at her soul. At this moment, Chandra is deeply troubled. Baan's bad enough. Vess is a whole nother story. Her relationship to Chandra was complicated and runs deep. In her current state, I would like these decisions to be taken out of her hands. Kaya asked, so you aim to protect her by stopping us from killing Liliana or Baan? Tezzeret too. Tezzeret needs to die for 100 reasons. Baan won't be missed either. If I thought I had a chance to talk you lot out of killing Liliana, well, but clearly that's off the table. If the only way I can protect Chandra right now is to advance this agenda, then I'm willing to escort you to Liliana's former home on Dominaria. But I won't stay for the kill. I don't want Chandra looking at me and seeing Liliana's assassin. That takes care of Vess, Vraska said dismissively. But if Ban is on Kaladesh, I'll need assistance too. That's not a plane I've ever visited. I have no connections there. No way to track them. Vivian stepped forward. I can help track him if Jaya brings us to his last known location. Jaya sighed heavily. It was clear she didn't relish getting in deeper and deeper. Still, agreed. On the condition that all 3 hunters leave Ravnica before Jace and Chandra return from Theros. I'm all for that, Vraska said quickly. Ral said, I'm all for it too. But the Wanderer turned to him and said, I can help you find Tezzeret. I don't see how. He was last seen on Amonkhet and left there nearly a day ago. It's the planar bridge technology in his chest. There's been some damage to the device, causing it to leave longer-lasting traces through the blind eternities than those of typical planeswalker. Traces I can follow. That would be appreciated, Ral said, looking half stunned, half intrigued. But if I might ask, what's your interest in this hunt? I too have a history with Tezzeret. Knowing him, need you ask more? Ral was silent, at least for the moment. Kaya said, I have another problem. I'm bound to this plane by thousands of Orzhov debtor contracts. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to be Guildmaster of Orzhov, and Orzhov doesn't want me as Guildmaster. Leaving Ravnica would be a relief, but leaving would also kill me, which is something of a drawback. Gan Shakta nodded. Dying would interfere with your ability to kill the necromancer, he said without irony. Right. That was my exact concern, Kaya replied, dripping with irony, which he didn't seem to notice. Of course, I've fantasized about it, really. Releasing all the debtors from their debts in one fell swoop. Hamik looked panicked. That would destroy the syndicate. They both looked around the room. Gon, Shakta, Baruvo, Ixava, even Ral seemed to like that idea. But Niv Mizzet stated, destroying the Orzhov would destroy Ravnica's delicate magical balance of power. Aurelia glared at him. Is it Ravnica's power that concerns you? Or your own? The Firemind glared back as flames roiled around his cheeks. Hamik said, Wait, I believe I've found a solution, a better solution. They waited. He gathered his thoughts and began. So I studied as a law mage for years under Teysa Karlov, and early this morning, those studies paid off. I believe I have found a legal loophole that would allow Kaya to magically, legally, voluntarily, and temporarily hand over the debtor contracts and the day-to-day operations of the Orzhov too. He paused and bit his lip nervously. To whom? Out with it, Vorel demanded. Well, to me. I'd become acting guildmaster, and that would allow Kaya to planeswalk away from Ravnica for short periods. Ral and Kaya both protested simultaneously. Tomik, no. Looking a little hurt, Tomik addressed them both. Don't you trust me? Lazav laughed. Ral's worried about 2 guildmasters sleeping together. Ral glowered at Lazav, but neither confirmed nor denied his assessment. Kaya said, I trust you, Tomik, but you really don't know what you're getting into. I can handle it. You know, temporarily. Well, if you're sure you want to take this on, I'm willing to give it a try. And that, said the Living Guild Pack, settles that. But let me make one last thing crystal clear to all three of you. We will require proof of killings. Chapter 21. Teo Virata. In theory, Teo was still looking for Rat, except he no longer had any idea where to look. With considerable dread, he descended the 500 steps to Rick's Mahdi, past the jugglers and the knife throwers and the caged horrors with the ventriloquists, one of whom was performing with a dummy named Teo Viridiat. The original Teo had braved Rakdos, fought off the hellhound Whipsaw, and even talked with Hikara, but there had been no sign of Arethia Shakta. He barely knew Ravnica, and Rat knew its every nook and cranny. He'd gone to all the places he could think of to go, while remaining very aware that his search had barely scratched the surface of the world city. So he wandered, keeping his eyes open, without much hope of success. Meanwhile, his thoughts wandered back to Liliana Vess. He couldn't fathom the guild's apparent lust for killing the woman without ever hearing her side of the story. And as much as he liked and respected Kaya, he couldn't understand her willingness to accept their assignment. Still, he didn't despair of talking her out of it. She was a reasonable person, and reasonable people generally saw reason in the end. He looked up at Ravnica's single son, accustomed to the twin sons of Goba Khan. Teo thought that Ravnica's star looked, well, lonely up there in the sky. He sighed heavily. Ravnica was a city of wonders. Even after all the death of the previous day, there were Orzhov collectors and their thralls, Azorius arresters on patrol, Rakdos cultists cartwheeling through streets, Boros sky knights soaring overhead, and the gateless, like Rat, just trying to survive. There were mourners and celebrants. There were drunkards and scholars, minotaurs and elves, goblins, and centaurs. Hundreds of folks must have passed Teo by without giving him a second look. He could probably fit the entire population of Gobakan into these few city blocks. Yet it seemed easier to get lost among these crowds than it was to get lost on the dunes where he was raised. Ravnica fascinated him, had done so almost from the moment of his arrival, but now there seemed a coldness to it that left him feeling hollow and alone, like a single sun floating through the sky. Was it only Rat that allowed me to believe in its splendor? Eventually, he found himself on the Transguild Promenade, where he had encountered her after his very first, and only, planeswalk from Gobakan to Ravnica. This was where she had picked him up off the cobblestones and adopted him, where she first terrified and enthralled him. By the storm, Araethia, where are you? There she was, sitting on the railing just as she had been the day before. In fact, her pose was so similar, right down to the berry she plucked off her belt and popped into her mouth, that for a second Teo wondered if she was merely a memory. But it was Rat, in the flesh, and as he had been thinking about their first encounter, it was clear the same thoughts were occupying her mind. Clear because she was going over it, out loud. He was right here, wasn't he? Covered in sand and coughing like he was gonna spit up a hairball or something, you know? And me, I was just sorta watching him, kinda curious about wherever he had teleported from, and maybe wherever he'd go to next. It didn't occur to me right off that he was a walker. Why wouldn't it? Right? And then, whoa, when he called out to me for help, looked right at me and said, please. Well, he could have knocked me right off this rail with a feather. Right off the promenade even. Maybe off the whole multiverse. He saw me. He saw me. Since normally, no one else could hear her, talking out loud to herself was a common practice with the rat. He'd come to love her high-speed rush of words. He could have stood there listening for hours. She said, when I think about it, he must have been adorable from the very first moment, right? But I don't think I noticed that right away. Or maybe I did somewhere deep, you know? Theo blushed a deep red, quickly cleared his throat, and made his presence known. Rat? He turned toward him fast, with an expression of pure panic. She tried to hide, jumping off the railing and curling up small. She held her hands in front of her eyes like a child playing peekaboo. If she can't see me, do you really think I can't see her? He walked right up to her and took her hands in his. You are really bad at hiding. She allowed him to pull her up to her feet. Yeah? Well, no experience at it, right? Not a skill I ever needed to acquire, me being me and all. Though me being me, I have acquired a lot of skills, you know? I know. A lot. A lot. I'm sorry, she said, just taking off like that. But you see, I'm no good at goodbyes. Another skill I never had to acquire. Never had a lot of folks to say goodbye to. Still, don't, really. Maybe it's not time for goodbyes. Aya sent me to find you. She insisted on it. Not time for goodbyes, Rat said, scrunching up her nose suspiciously. That's what she said. You have to come back with me. I don't know, Teo. I mean, I can't watch you both leave. Not after Hikara. I understand, and I think Kaya does too, but she sent me to find you nevertheless. It is kinda curious making. I wonder what she has in mind. One easy way to find out. He looked away. He waited. He shrugged and echoed. One easy way to find out. She put her arm through his, and they headed off together. Before they were even off the bridge, Rat said, Wow, you really feel strongly about not killing Miss Ravenhair. He only looked briefly surprised before saying, Yes, I do. Kaya's Gatewatch now. She took an oath to protect people, not to assassinate them. But what if killing Miss Vest does protect people? How can we know that if, without at least listening to what the woman might have to say for herself? That's a good point. So you'll help me convince Kaya? I think so, Rat said. Teo nodded and smiled, but Rat wasn't quite done. Unless she convinces me first.